I was standing in my backyard with a cup of coffee when I saw the construction crew setting up wooden posts along what I thought was the property line. Except, they were a good 6 feet into my side of the yard. My name is Marcus Ashford, and I had lived in the Pleasant Grove community in Naperville, Illinois, for 3 years without much trouble from the HOA until that Tuesday morning in April when everything went sideways. The workers had orange vests and were unloading materials from a truck parked on the street. I walked over quickly, my coffee sloshing a bit as I picked up my pace. "Hey, excuse me," I called out to the nearest worker, a heavy-set guy with a clipboard. "What's going on here?" He looked up from his papers and squinted at me. "Installing the new community fence. HOA project. On my property." I gestured to where they had already driven 2 posts into the ground. "That's definitely my yard," the worker shrugged. "I just follow the markers they put down, man." "You need to talk to the HOA about property lines." I pulled out my phone and immediately called the HOA office. A cheerful recorded message told me their hours were Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and today was Tuesday, so they should be open. I checked my watch. 8:30 in the morning. Of course they were not answering yet. "You guys need to stop," I said firmly. "This is my property and I didn't authorize any fence installation." "Look, buddy," the foreman said, walking over now. "We got a contract with the HOA. They showed us the survey, marked everything out. We're just doing our job." "What survey? I want to see it." He went to his truck and came back with a rolled-up document. I spread it out on the hood of my car and my blood pressure immediately spiked. The survey they had was dated 2 months ago, from a company I had never heard of, and it showed the property line running right through where they were installing the fence, which would put a significant chunk of my backyard on the HOA common area side. "This is wrong," I said. "I have the actual survey from when I bought the house. The property line is at least 6 feet past where you guys are working." The foreman scratched his head. "I don't know what to tell you. We got our orders from the HOA. Maybe you should get them on the phone." I tried calling again. Still voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice level but probably failing. "This is Marcus Ashford at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. There's a construction crew on my property right now installing a fence that's encroaching on my land. Call me back immediately." Then I went inside and dug through my filing cabinet until I found the survey from my home purchase. It was clear as day. The property line was marked with iron stakes, and I went back outside to look for them. The first one I found was exactly where I remembered, a good 6 feet past where the construction crew was working. I marched back over to them. "Stop. Seriously, stop working right now. I found the survey stakes and you're way over the line." The foreman held up his hands. "Look, I get it, but I can't just stop a job because a homeowner says so. I need authorization from the people who hired us." "Fine. Then I'm calling the police for trespassing." That got his attention. "Whoa, let's not escalate this. How about we just pause until you can get this sorted with the HOA? I'll call my supervisor." I agreed to that, and he made a call while I tried the HOA office again. This time, someone picked up. "Pleasant Grove HOA, this is Brenda speaking." "Brenda, thank goodness. This is Marcus Ashford. There's a crew at my house installing a fence on my property, several feet past the actual survey line. They need to stop immediately." "Oh, Mr. Ashford, yes. That's the new perimeter fence project. It's been approved by the board." "I don't care if it's been approved. It's on my property. According to our survey, the fence is being installed on HOA common ground. Your survey is wrong. I have the original survey from when I purchased the home, and I have the iron stakes marking the actual property line. Your fence is 6 feet into my yard." There was a pause. "I'll need to have someone from the board call you back." "When?" I'm not sure. They're all volunteers with day jobs. Brenda, there are people literally installing a fence on my land right now. This can't wait. I understand your frustration, Mr. Ashford, but I can only take a message. I hung up and rubbed my temples. The construction crew was standing around now, clearly annoyed at the delay. The foreman came back over. My supervisor says we need to keep working unless we get a stop order from the HOA or a legal injunction. You're kidding. Sorry, man. It's business. I called the police non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they would send an officer to document the dispute, but that property line disagreements were civil matters, and they could not force the crew to stop unless there was a clear crime being committed. 20 minutes later, a Naperville police officer arrived. He was young, probably mid-20s, and looked like he would rather be anywhere else. I showed him my survey, the iron stakes, and the fence posts that had already been installed past the line. Yeah, that does look like they're on your side, he said, taking photos. But like dispatch said, this is a civil issue. You'll probably need to get a lawyer involved. Can't you at least make them stop until this gets resolved? Not really my authority. If they have a contract with the HOA and paperwork saying they're allowed to be here, I can't just shut down their work. You need an injunction from a judge. The officer took down all the information, gave me a case number, and left. The construction crew went back to work. I spent the next hour on the phone. First, I called a real estate attorney whose name I found online. His secretary said he could see me Thursday. I explained it was an emergency, and she said the earliest would be tomorrow afternoon. I took the appointment. Then I called a surveying company and paid for a rush job. They said they could have someone out by Friday. I asked if they could come sooner, and they said Friday was the rush job. I went back outside and started taking videos and photos of everything. The crew had installed 8 posts now, all of them clearly on my side of the property line. I documented the iron stakes, measured the distances, and made sure I had timestamps on everything. At 11, my phone finally rang. The caller ID said Pleasant Grove HOA. Mr. Ashford. This is Deborah Winters. I'm the HOA president. Finally, someone in charge. Mrs. Winters, thank you for calling. We have a serious problem here. Yes, Brenda told me about your concerns. I want to assure you that we had a professional survey done before starting the fence project. I have a professional survey too from when I bought the house 3 years ago, and I have the iron stakes proving the property line. Your crew is 6 feet onto my property. Our survey is more recent and was conducted by a licensed surveyor. Who? Midwest Property Solutions. I had never heard of them. I want to see their credentials and the full survey report. That's proprietary information for the HOA. Excuse me, this directly affects my property. You don't get to keep it secret. Her tone became icy. Mr. Ashford, the HOA has authority over all community improvements. The fence project was approved by the board unanimously. Not on my property, it wasn't. If you have concerns about the survey, you're welcome to bring them to the next board meeting. That's 2 weeks from Thursday. 2 weeks. The fence will be finished by then. The project is on schedule and will continue as planned. Then I'll be getting an injunction. That's your right, Mr. Ashford. But I should warn you that legal action against the HOA will be viewed as a violation of the Community Covenant Agreement. You could face fines and other consequences. I could not believe what I was hearing. Are you threatening me for trying to protect my own property? I'm simply informing you of the HOA rules that you agreed to when you purchased your home. Have a good day. She hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. This was insane. I went back inside and pulled out my HOA documents from when I bought the house. I read through the covenant agreement, looking for anything about property disputes or fence installations. There was a section about the HOA's authority to maintain common areas and make improvements, but nothing that gave them the right to encroach on private property. There was also a dispute resolution process that required mediation before legal action, but I figured that ship had sailed when they started building on my land without my permission. By 5 in the evening, the construction crew had finished for the day. They had installed posts along about 50 feet of what should have been my property line, all of them 6 feet too far onto my side. My backyard had effectively been reduced, and if they finished the fence, I would lose a significant chunk of my land. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if the judge sided with the HOA? What if this dragged out for months or years? What if I ended up bankrupting myself in legal fees? The next morning, the construction crew was back at 7 sharp. I went out in my bathrobe and slippers to document more. The foreman saw me and just shook his head. "Nothing personal, man," he called over. "Yeah, I know." I got dressed and went to work, though I could barely focus. I taught history at a high school in downtown Naperville, and normally I loved my job, but that day I kept checking my phone between classes, half expecting another call from the HOA or my attorney. At 3 o'clock, I headed to the lawyer's office. His name was Richard Pemberton, and his practice was in a modest office building near the downtown metro station. He was in his 50s with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid out everything for him: the survey discrepancy, the iron stakes, the HOA's refusal to stop work, and Deborah Winter's threat about community covenant violations. He listened carefully, taking notes, and then pulled up a map of my property on his computer. "You have your survey with you." I handed him the documents. He studied them for several minutes, comparing them to something on his screen. "Okay, so here's where we stand," he said finally. "Illinois law is very clear about property boundaries. Survey stakes and recorded plats take precedence. If your survey is accurate and the stakes are where they should be, the HOA is trespassing. Can we get an injunction? We can file for a temporary restraining order. I'll need to see the HOA's survey to compare, but based on what you're telling me, we have a strong case. The problem is timing. Emergency injunctions are hard to get, and we'll need to show immediate irreparable harm. They're building a fence on my property. I understand, but legally, that's potentially repairable. They could remove the fence. The question is whether a judge will see this as urgent enough to issue an emergency order versus a regular hearing, which could take a few weeks. By then, the fence will be done. Probably. But that actually works in your favor in some ways. The more they build on your property, the more clear-cut the damages become. If we go to court, you can sue for the cost of removal, restoration of your property, and possibly compensation for the loss of use and emotional distress. I slumped back in my chair. So I just let them finish? Not exactly. I'll file for the TRO today. We might get lucky and get a sympathetic judge who issues it quickly. Either way, I'll send a cease and desist letter to the HOA and the construction company. That creates a paper trail showing they were warned. If they continue after that, it strengthens our case significantly. How much is this going to cost me? I'll need a $5,000 retainer to start. Property disputes can get expensive, but if your case is as clear as it seems, the HOA might be ordered to pay your legal fees in the end. I swallowed hard. $5,000 was a big chunk of my savings, but what choice did I have? I gave him my credit card information. "I'll have the TRO motion filed by end of business today," Richard said. "And the cease and desist letters will go out via certified mail and email within the hour." Hang in there, Marcus. We'll get this sorted out. I left his office feeling slightly better but still anxious. When I got home, the construction crew was gone for the day, but they had made serious progress. The fence posts now ran the entire length of my backyard, at least 100 feet, all of them on my property. Thursday morning, I woke to the sound of power tools. They were attaching the actual fence panels now. I took more videos and photos, then got ready for work. Around noon, Richard called. The TRO was denied. Judge said there wasn't sufficient evidence of immediate irreparable harm. Are you kidding me? I know. But here's the thing. The construction company called me. They received my cease and desist letter and their lawyer is nervous. They're asking the HOA for clarification on the property line. Will the HOA give it to them? That's the million-dollar question. I also sent the cease and desist to the HOA board and specifically to Deborah Winters. She's required to acknowledge it. And if she doesn't, then she's knowingly allowing trespass to continue after being legally warned, which could expose her personally to liability, not just the HOA. Friday morning, the surveying company I hired showed up. 2 guys with equipment spent 3 hours measuring, checking the iron stakes and documenting everything. When they finished, the lead surveyor came to my door. "Mr. Ashford, I've got good news for you. Your original survey is spot on. Those iron stakes are exactly where they should be according to the recorded plat. The fence is definitely on your property, between 5 and 7 feet over the line depending on where you measure. Can you put that in writing? I'll have a full report to you by Monday with a certified statement." "Perfect. Thank you." I immediately called Richard and gave him the update. He was pleased. That's exactly what we need. Once I have that certified survey, we can file a lawsuit. The HOA won't have a leg to stand on. Saturday morning, I was in my kitchen when I heard someone pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Deborah Winters standing there with another woman I didn't recognize. Deborah was in her early 50s, with short blonde hair styled in that typical "I want to speak to the manager" cut. She wore yoga pants and a puffy vest, and her expression was pure fury. "Mr. Ashford, we need to talk." "Hello, Mrs. Winters, and you are—" I looked at the other woman, Linda Patterson, HOA treasurer. "What can I do for you?" Deborah held up a sheet of paper. "This cease and desist letter is completely inappropriate. The HOA is acting within its legal rights. According to my survey and my attorney, you're not. You're building on my property. We have a survey that says otherwise. Then show it to me. We don't have to show you anything. This is an HOA matter. It became my matter when you started building on my land." Linda stepped forward. She seemed less confrontational than Deborah. "Mr. Ashford, perhaps we can resolve this amicably. What if we arrange for a joint survey? Both our surveyor and yours together to verify the property line." That seemed reasonable. I'd be open to that. When Deborah cut in, "We're not redoing the survey. We already paid for one." "Mrs. Winters," I said slowly, "if your survey is correct, you have nothing to worry about. But my survey says you're on my property and I have iron stakes to prove it. A joint survey would settle this." "The fence stays," Deborah said flatly. "Then I guess I'll see you in court." "You're making a big mistake," she said, her voice rising. "The HOA has resources. We have lawyers on retainer. You're just one homeowner. We'll bury you in legal fees." "Are you threatening me again?" "I'm stating facts. You signed a covenant agreement. You agreed to abide by HOA decisions. I didn't agree to let you steal my land." Deborah's face turned red. "How dare you?" "The HOA is protecting property values for everyone in this community. That fence is a security measure." "Security?" I almost laughed. "It's a decorative split-rail fence. Who is it keeping out, dear?" "This conversation is over," Deborah snapped. She turned and stormed off my porch, Linda hurrying after her. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. This was escalating fast. By the following Tuesday, the fence was complete. I now had a lovely cedar split-rail fence running through my backyard, 6 feet onto my property, cutting off what used to be a garden area and part of my lawn. I had spent the weekend photographing everything from every angle and documenting the exact measurements from the iron stakes to the fence line. Richard filed the lawsuit Monday morning. We were suing the HOA for trespass, property damage, and injunctive relief demanding the fence be moved to the correct property line. We were also asking for compensation for legal fees and the cost of restoring my property. The HOA was required to respond within 30 days. In the meantime, Richard said we should document any other actions the HOA took that could be seen as retaliatory. I didn't have to wait long. Wednesday afternoon, I got an email from the HOA, subject line, "Violation Notice." I opened it with a sinking feeling. Dear Mr. Ashford, it has come to our attention that your lawn has exceeded the maximum permitted height of 3.5 inches, as specified in the Community Covenant Section 7.2. Additionally, your garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, in violation of Section 8.4. You are hereby fined $250. Please remit payment within 14 days or face additional penalties. I went outside and looked at my lawn. It was maybe 4 inches, if that. I had mowed it 10 days ago, and the garbage cans. I had brought them in from the curb the night of collection and put them in my garage, but I guess they were visible from the street for a few hours. I forwarded the email to Richard. He called me within an hour. This is retaliation, and it's actually helpful for our case. Document everything. If they keep doing this, it shows a pattern of harassment. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 4 more violation notices. My mailbox needed repainting. A bush in my front yard was improperly trimmed. My car was parked in my driveway at an unapproved angle. Each violation came with fines ranging from $100 to $300. I didn't pay any of them, on Richard's advice. He said they were bogus and retaliatory, and paying would be seen as admitting they were valid. The HOA responded to our lawsuit with a motion to dismiss, claiming the dispute should go through mediation first per the covenant agreement. Richard opposed the motion, arguing that the HOA had already acted in bad faith by building the fence without notifying me or resolving the survey discrepancy first. The hearing on the motion was scheduled for early June, almost 2 months after the fence had been built. In the meantime, Deborah Winters ramped up her campaign. She started posting on the neighborhood Facebook group about homeowners who refuse to respect community rules. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Several neighbors messaged me privately with support, but publicly most stayed silent. No one wanted to cross the HOA. One neighbor, though, did reach out in person. His name was Tom Chen, and he lived 3 houses down. He knocked on my door one Saturday morning in early May. "Marcus, hey. Got a minute?" "Sure, come in." We sat in my living room, and Tom looked uncomfortable. "Look, I wanted to give you a heads up. Deborah called an emergency board meeting last night. You're on the board." "Yeah, but I'm thinking of resigning after this mess." "They voted to place a lien on your property for the unpaid fines." "What? Can they do that?" "According to the covenant, yeah. If fines go unpaid for more than 30 days, they can file a lien." "Those fines are garbage. My lawn is fine, my mailbox doesn't need painting." "I know." "I voted against it. I was the only one." "Deborah is out for blood, Marcus. She's taking this lawsuit personally. She's the one who built on my property, I know, and for what it's worth, I think you're right. I looked at the survey they used. It's sketchy. The company, Midwest Property Solutions, they're new. I think they're buddies with someone on the board. Who? Not sure yet, but I'm looking into it. There might be something shady going on. This was a new angle I hadn't considered. You think someone on the board is benefiting from this? Maybe. The fence project was expensive. We paid almost $80,000 for materials and labor. The company that did it, Greenfield Construction, their bid was way higher than the other two we got, but the board approved it anyway. And Deborah pushed hard for this fence, harder than made sense for what's basically a cosmetic project. Can you find out more? I'll try. Just be careful. Deborah has influence in this community and she's not above playing dirty. After Tom left, I called Richard and filled him in. He was very interested in the potential corruption angle. If we can show the survey was fraudulent or that there was some kind of kickback scheme, this case gets a lot bigger. Do you think Tom can get documentation? I'll ask him. The lien notice arrived in my mail a week later. It claimed I owed $2,000 in unpaid fines, which had apparently grown due to late fees and administrative costs. Richard filed an emergency motion to remove the lien, arguing it was baseless and retaliatory. The judge ordered a hearing for late May. In the meantime, Tom came through. He managed to get copies of the HOA's financial records, the bids for the fence project, and the survey from Midwest Property Solutions. He dropped them off at my house in a manila envelope one evening, looking nervous. I could get in serious trouble for this, but something doesn't smell right. Look at the payments to Greenfield Construction. They're being paid in installments, but the amounts don't match the contract. I spread the papers out on my kitchen table. Tom was right. The contract said $80,000, but the payments totaled over $90,000. The extra $10,000 was labeled additional surveying and administrative costs. And look at this. Tom pointed to another document. Midwest Property Solutions is owned by a guy named Gerald Patterson. Patterson. Like Linda Patterson, the treasurer, her husband. My eyes widened. You're kidding. Nope, and Greenfield Construction is owned by Deborah Winter's brother-in-law. This is fraud. Yep, and it gets better. Look at the dates. The survey wasn't done until after the board approved the fence project. They voted to spend $80,000 on a fence before they even had a survey showing where to build it. I took photos of everything and immediately sent them to Richard. He called me back within minutes, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. Marcus, this is huge. This isn't just a property dispute anymore. This is fraud, misappropriation of HOA funds, and possibly embezzlement. We need to notify the homeowners and probably the state's attorney. Will that help my case? It'll obliterate their case. If we can show the survey was fraudulent and done by a board member's husband, your property line dispute becomes open and shut. Plus, the HOA members might vote to remove Deborah and the rest of the board once they know their dues are being stolen. What do we do? I'm going to amend our lawsuit to include allegations of fraud, and I'm going to send a letter to the Illinois Attorney General's office. They handle HOA fraud cases. This could turn criminal. Things moved quickly after that. Richard amended the lawsuit and sent copies to every homeowner in the Pleasant Grove community, along with a letter explaining what we had found. He also sent a detailed complaint to the Attorney General's office with all the documentation Tom had provided. The neighborhood exploded. The Facebook group turned into a war zone, with homeowners demanding answers from the board. Deborah tried to control the narrative, claiming the allegations were lies from a disgruntled homeowner, but too many people had seen the documents. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the first Saturday in June. Richard advised me to attend but not to say much. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. Every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. I arrived with Richard, and the room fell silent when we walked in. Deborah was at the front table with Linda, Tom, and two other board members I recognized but didn't know well. Deborah's face was tight with anger when she saw me. "Let's get started," she said curtly. "This meeting has been called to address false allegations made against the board. Mr. Ashford and his attorney have been spreading lies." "They're not lies," Tom said, standing up. "I provided those documents and they're real. The homeowners have a right to know how their dues are being spent. You had no authority to access those records. I'm on the board." "I have every authority." The room erupted with people shouting questions. Deborah banged a gavel, trying to restore order. One homeowner, a woman in her 40s, stood up. "Is it true that Linda's husband was paid for the survey, and that Deborah's brother-in-law did the fence work?" Linda looked mortified. "It's not what it sounds like. My husband runs a legitimate surveying business." "But you didn't disclose the conflict of interest," Richard said calmly. "Illinois HOA law requires board members to disclose any financial interest in contracts." "You voted to approve a contract that directly benefited your husband." "And you, Deborah," Tom added. "Your brother-in-law's company was paid $90,000, not $80,000. Where did the extra $10,000 go?" "Administrative costs," Deborah snapped. "That's not what the contract says." The meeting devolved into chaos. Homeowners were yelling, some at Deborah, some at Linda, some demanding a new election. Richard leaned over to me and whispered, "This is going better than I expected." A vote was called to remove the entire board. It passed overwhelmingly. Deborah tried to argue it wasn't valid, but the HOA bylaws were clear. A majority vote of homeowners could remove board members for cause. Deborah stood up, her face crimson. "Fine, you want to run this place yourselves. Good luck. You're all idiots if you think this is over." "I'm suing for defamation," she stormed out, Linda hurrying after her. The homeowners elected an interim board on the spot, with Tom as president. One of the first things they did was vote to halt any legal action against me and to commission an independent survey of my property line. That survey was completed 2 weeks later. It confirmed what I had been saying all along. The fence was 6 feet onto my property. The new board voted to pay for the fence to be moved to the correct property line and to compensate me for my legal fees and the loss of use of my property. The amount they agreed to was $15,000. But the story didn't end there. In July, the Illinois Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into the Pleasant Grove HOA finances. Auditors came in and found even more irregularities. Over the past 2 years, Deborah had approved over $50,000 in questionable payments to companies owned by board members or their relatives. In August, Deborah Winters and Linda Patterson were charged with fraud and embezzlement. Gerald Patterson, Linda's husband, was charged with fraud for falsifying the property survey. Deborah's brother-in-law, the owner of Greenfield Construction, was charged as a co-conspirator for inflating invoices and kicking back money to Deborah. The local news picked up the story. HOA president charged in embezzlement scheme was the headline on the Naperville Sun. I was interviewed briefly, though I didn't say much beyond confirming the property line dispute that had started the investigation. The criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring. In the meantime, the new HOA board hired a lawyer to try to recover the stolen funds. They filed a civil suit against Deborah, Linda, Gerald, and the construction company. My own lawsuit was settled in September. The HOA paid me $25,000 to cover my legal fees, the surveying costs, compensation for damages, and the stress of the whole ordeal. The fence was moved to the correct property line and my backyard was restored. I had mixed feelings about the whole thing. On one hand, I had won. My property was intact, I had been compensated, and the corrupt board members were facing justice. On the other hand, it had been exhausting and stressful, and I had spent 6 months fighting battles I never wanted to fight. Tom remained HOA president and did a good job cleaning things up. He implemented new transparency measures, required disclosure of all conflicts of interest, and got competitive bids for any work over $5,000. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. In March of the following year, I attended the criminal trial. It lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Deborah had created fake invoices, approved payments to companies that didn't do any work, and pocketed thousands of dollars. Linda had helped by falsifying the HOA's financial records. Gerald had fabricated survey data to justify the fence placement, knowing it would benefit his wife and Deborah. The jury found all of them guilty. Deborah was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $100,000. Linda got 2 years and had to pay $50,000. Gerald got 3 years for fraud. The brother-in-law who owned Greenfield Construction took a plea deal and got probation plus restitution. I was in the courtroom when the sentences were read. Deborah's face was blank, but I could see the defeat in her eyes. Linda cried quietly. Part of me felt bad for them, but mostly I just felt relieved it was over. After the trial, I went out to dinner with Tom and his wife. We toasted to honesty and transparency, and to never taking property lines for granted. You know, Tom said, if you hadn't fought this, none of it would have come out. Deborah would still be stealing from the HOA, and who knows how much more damage she would have done. I was just trying to protect my yard. Yeah, but you did more than that. You protected the whole community. I drove home that night thinking about how one thing leads to another. A fence installed 6 feet over a property line had unraveled a whole web of corruption. It had been a nightmare while it was happening, but at least some good had come from it. My backyard looked great with the fence in the right place. I had replanted the garden area that had been torn up, and the grass had grown back thick and green. Sometimes I stood out there with a beer and looked at the fence line, marveling at how something so simple had caused so much trouble. The Pleasant Grove community settled into a new normal. The HOA was run honestly now, with real oversight and accountability. Property values actually went up a bit once the scandal faded, probably because people appreciated the transparency. I got a few apology messages from neighbors who had stayed silent during the fight. I understood. People were scared of the HOA, scared of Deborah, scared of fines and liens and being ostracized. I didn't hold it against them. One neighbor, though, never apologized, an older guy named Harold who lived across the street. He had been friends with Deborah and remained convinced I had destroyed a good thing. He glared at me whenever I left the house and once left a nasty note on my windshield calling me a troublemaker. Tom dealt with it by enforcing the HOA rules fairly. When Harold's lawn got overgrown and his house needed exterior paint, he got the same violation notices anyone else would get. Harold complained it was retaliation, but the rules were the rules. Eventually, he sold his house and moved away. By the summer, things felt peaceful again. I was dating someone new, a teacher named Emily who I had met at a district professional development event. She thought my HOA saga was hilarious and occasionally joked that she would never buy a house in an HOA community. "Are you kidding?" I said. "After this, neither will I." We were sitting on my back deck, the fence line clearly visible behind us, and she laughed. At least you've got a good story. Too good. I never want to live through something like that again. But I was grateful for how it turned out. Justice had been served, my property was protected, and the community was better off. It had cost me time, money, and a lot of stress, but I had stood up for what was right, and that mattered. Looking back now, I realize the whole thing taught me something important. You can't let people push you around, even when they have authority or power. The HOA had rules and lawyers and the weight of a whole community behind them, but they were wrong. The property line was the property line, and no amount of fancy surveys or intimidation could change that. I also learned that corruption thrives in silence. If Tom hadn't been willing to look into things, if I hadn't been willing to push back, Deborah and her cronies would have kept stealing. It took courage to stand up, but it was worth it. The fence stood as a reminder of all of that. Every time I looked at it, I thought about the fight, the stress, the victory, and the lessons learned. It was just a fence, but it meant so much more. As summer turned to fall, Emily and I got serious. She moved in with me, and we talked about getting married eventually. She loved the house, the neighborhood, and even the HOA, now that it was run by honest people. "You really turned this place around," she said one evening as we walked through the neighborhood. "I just wanted my yard back." "And you got it, plus you saved everyone from a corrupt board. Not bad for a history teacher," I laughed. "I'd rather teach about other people's battles." "Too late. You're part of history now. The guy who took down the HOA president." It did feel a bit like history, something that happened in the past that I could look back on with perspective. The fear and anger had faded, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and closure. In October, the HOA held a community appreciation event to thank everyone who had helped clean up the corruption. They gave Tom an award for his leadership. They also gave me a plaque thanking me for standing up for honesty and integrity. It was a nice gesture, though part of me felt awkward being celebrated for something I had done out of necessity. Still, I appreciated the recognition. Deborah Winters sent letters from prison to several homeowners, including me. Hers was not an apology. It was a rambling screed about how she had been unfairly targeted, how the investigation was biased, and how she was the real victim. I read it once and then threw it away. Linda's letter was different. She apologized, said she had made terrible choices, and hoped I could forgive her someday. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. Maybe someday I would write back, but not yet. Life moved on. I kept teaching. Emily and I kept building our life together, and the neighborhood kept improving under Tom's leadership. The fence, the lawsuit, the trial, all of it faded into the background, just another chapter in my life. But I never forgot the lessons. Stand up for yourself. Don't let authority figures intimidate you. Ask questions when things don't make sense. And always know where your property lines are. The iron stakes were still there in my yard, slightly hidden by grass but solid and unmovable. I checked on them occasionally, just to make sure. You never know when you might need proof of where you stand. One evening in late November, I was raking leaves when Harold's old house sold to a young couple with a toddler. They introduced themselves as Jake and Michelle, and they seemed nice. I welcomed them to the neighborhood and gave them the brief, sanitized version of the HOA drama. "Wow," Jake said. "So the fence on our property, is it in the right place?" "Should be," I said. "The new board had everything resurveyed, but if you're worried, you can always check the iron stakes." "Good to know. Thanks for the heads up." They moved in a week later, and the neighborhood gained another family. Life continued as it always does. By the time winter arrived, I felt like I had completely moved on. The fence was just a fence again, not a symbol of a battle. My property was my property, clearly defined and protected. The HOA was a responsible organization, not a corrupt regime. I had won, and not just in court. I had won my peace of mind back, my sense of security, and my faith that the system, while slow and imperfect, could still deliver justice. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. Emily and I got engaged on New Year's Eve. We were standing in my backyard, looking at the stars, and I realized how lucky I was. Not just because of her, but because I had a home I loved, a community I trusted, and a future I was excited about. "This is a good place," she said, squeezing my hand. "It is now," I agreed. The fence stood behind us, right where it belonged on the actual property line. And that, as far as I was concerned, was exactly where it should stay.